Good evening. Captain Retired Matt Edwards here on the 22nd of February 2024 with the next installment of the Facebook Live Observation Post Weekly Report. At least I hope to do it weekly. Sometimes I've been skipping them, like last week I wasn't feeling the best after snowstorm and the snowblower was broke and a whole bunch of shit. Anyway, getting back to what I've been doing on these many times, I've got a list of items I've put into a document in the files portion of my group. I'm going to go through 3 items and then I'll just wing it on a couple of things, probably about a couple of posts I made recently. So number 457 in the numbered list in my group: deception operation where Canada pretends to be Manulife, like what Russia does in the war on Ukraine. Now I got to be honest, I wrote that there and I'm not exactly sure what I meant with Russia using a deception operation, except they're always putting out false information about the war, but Ukraine doesn't. Each side in the war wants to put out their own side, their own story. Now, the thing about Manulife pretending to be the underwriter of the policy, well, that's already been to court. In the Dennis Manoos class action in 2012, they said that Manulife was the commercial partner of the Chief of Defense Staff. Now, if you're the commercial partner of who the judge, Justice Robin Burns, he said that the Chief of Defense Staff was the de facto underwriter. Now, I got problems with that. For one thing, on paper, the policy is between Manulife and the Chief of Defense Staff, and they name the Chief of Defense Staff as the policy holder, not the underwriter. They name Manulife as the insurer. Now, the insurer is the person who takes the premium in consideration of underwriting the risk. But Manulife doesn't underwrite the risk. The government gets sued, not Manulife. Now, I've gone on and about that so much, I'll stop right there. Now, number 458 is another topic I've talked about a lot. Bill C-13. Now, that's the bill in 2011 that changed the Canada Pension Plan contributions for a long-term disability plan and CPP contributions. Government is avoiding the payment of CPP contributions. Could this be a public interest case? Well, you see, the government thinks it's acting in the public interest when it says that Canada Pension Plan must be deducted from long-term disability insurances. However, many times that just means you have less money in the year now. So that could be argued that it's not in the public interest. Now, on the other hand, if they took the money out and sent it to the plan will be stronger because they'd have more money. On the other hand, it would possibly fool up the clawback of Canada Pension Plan disability, because if you had to deduct Canada Pension Plan contributions out of long-term disability, how in the name of Christ would they be able to look at the person who's disabled and say, I want you to apply for the Canada Pension Plan disability? Well, you're deducting premiums because, well, you're not too disabled to work, are you? Because the Canada Pension Plan disability has a very strict definition of disability. And most insurance plans have a 2-year period of own occupation. And then if you qualify past that, and that's based on the underwriter or the administrator acting for the underwriter, their decision, they decide if a person's going to get it past 2 years. Now, number 459. I'm winging through these ones, and then I'll hopefully go a bit longer on the other stuff I plan to talk about. Democratic delegation of political power. Ministers delegate their power downwards. Well, we're in a democracy on paper. So, we vote for the member of parliament, the party in Canada, because we're a Westminster-style democracy, the party that gets the most members of parliament, they form the government, they set up a cabinet, the cabinet has ministers, the ministers then delegate their power downwards to the people that work for the government, and that's the executive branch of government. Unlike the judiciary, which is the third branch of government. You have the lawmakers, the executive, and the judiciary. That's the three branches of government. Without that power, the people that work for the government wouldn't be able to get anything done because they wouldn't be allowed to act. So your political will, through the vote, goes to the government, and then the government passes it down to the members in the executive, and then they act. Now, getting back to the CISP thing, there's a problem, you see. They aren't part of the government. Manulife's not. They were hired by the government, but they're not part of the government. So there's something wrong with that, see? Now, there's a couple of government insurances. There was one in World War I and one in World War II for soldiers, and I don't think they hired a company to administer it. Canada Pension Plan has Canada Pension Plan Disability, which is basically a disability insurance. So does the government really need to hire somebody like Manulife or Great West Life or Sun Life or Industrial Alliance to administer their insurance policies? In fact, I was reading that in the last day or so when I was looking through some of my information that I was reviewing, and I saw, I think the Senate asked that to the President of the Service Income Support Insurance Plan. Excuse me. Now, I've got my 3 points in my list covered. I'm going to cover pensions, tax expenditures, and there's another post I'll skim up through and I'll remind myself of what it was. Now, I put this into my tax savings ideas group because I haven't been posting much of that, and then I share it from that. That's one of my most popular groups, and people like to save money on taxes. So I said tax expenditure costs for the registered pension plan in Canada according to Finance Canada's 2023 tax expenditure report. Now see, because of my obsessive compulsive personality disorder, I don't like things to be wrong. I don't like things to be gray. I like things to be black and white. Now, in that 2023 report, well, I said, I'll read out the post first, then I'll explain what I was talking about. I said, I wonder if my criticism has been heard and they adjusted their method, as I have been saying common sense things like they cannot claim that there is a tax expenditure due to double taxation, for instance. Number two, I was also wondering if they did try to claim that there was a tax expenditure, they had to take double taxation into account and reduce the tax expenditure by the tax collected on the retirement taxation. I put a red box around this figure as they do exactly what I have to wonder about their process. Even though I said this is what they should do, I don't know, because I don't trust them, because they don't seem very competent. Then can we trust their accounting work? Number three, the reason I brought this up in the previous point was that it is a government policy to force, or at least encourage, people to save for retirement, which was once viewed entirely as a personal responsibility. So government meddling in the retirement field has made the government party to retirement planning now, and I said, A, it owes a fiduciary duty to employees who did not have access to their own money to plan for their own retirement. You can't very well buy an RRSP if you put the money into a pension, can you? B, it claims to own the property that is really the contributor's equitable property. This is deceptive and perhaps fraud. Now, what I'm trying to say here is the government claims that it owns federal pensions. Now, it does own them legally, but the way all pensions work is that the administrator owns them legally, but they own them for the benefit of the pensioner. So in equitable ownership, it belongs to the people who put the money into it. See? So the government would like to say that it owns the property, but it doesn't. Now, see, for many decades, the government simply used accounting to stipulate how much was owed to retirees, ignoring the common law of trust, saying that they have actual money on hand. When you sat there, when you state there is money on hand. So the government took actual earned pay from an employee. They said they had it put into the bank, but they didn't put the money into the bank. They simply had a paper system saying they owed the money to the retiree, the contributor. Now, the problem with that is that it's illegal. The government would not allow any pension administrator to simply state they owe the money and not have actuarial reserves put away to pay the pension. Now, I don't have the figures offhand very close, but I'll tell you the way it works. You don't have to have all of the money that's due, but you have to have a significant portion of the money that has to be paid out eventually to the people. Now, I said take 2017 into account. Finance Canada says that there's $28 billion was lost in taxation of pension because they allowed more for deductions on contribution and while invested than they got when the pension was withdrawn. That point is fatally flawed, but a prohibition against double taxation that they might be able to claim a net, but they might be able to claim a net loss on one or the other, but not both. Okay? Due to the tax policy has to be obeyed. Number one, $16 billion in taxes lost to pension contributions versus $12 billion collected when taxes are charged on retirement. So there's a $4 billion shortfall according to these assholes. But they said there's a $23 billion lost in the investment phase of the pension versus $12 billion. And it collected when they took the pension out. So that would have resulted in an $11 billion shortfall. But they, in point number 3, I said, however, you cannot compound the investment and the contribution losses due to Canada's tax policy of not having to pay tax twice on the same amount of money that you receive. You can't tax something twice, okay? If you tax it once, you're over and you're done with it. Now, while I'm not bragging per se, they don't seem to understand the tax rules as well as I do. A 1972 Supreme Court of Canada case said that you had to receive and enjoy money in order to be taxed on it, okay? So if you put money into a pension, you don't receive it. You don't enjoy it, so they can't tax it. If you put it into a pension and it's being invested, you still don't have the ability to get that money, so you can't be taxed on it legally because of that Supreme Court of Canada ruling. It's common sense as well. Now, an amount paid into a pension is not received and enjoyed. It is held in a vested, stated amount. In a vested state. I put a D on it. It says stated. It's held in a vested state, so that means it's locked in. And you cannot touch it until certain rules apply. Caveat, just yesterday I saw in a 1960 Hansard that the Canada changed the rules to stop taxation on invested pensions. Now, because I'm on this topic, I'll read that off because I didn't know that Canada did it. But up until 1960, it appears, Canada did tax pensions while you didn't have it, but it was vested in a pension. Now, I don't know how they would come up with some formula to do that because what the hell are you going to do? I mean, how do you know what rate of return you're going to get? You might die before you ever get it. You don't have that money. I said it seems to me that they write these reports up so the government can consider changes to taxation policy. If I'm right, then they ought to make sure that they know the rules. See attached picture of Landry, Tax Court of Canada, 1998, where I got my information about double taxation. The government could make costly mistakes if they changed things on a whim instead of on fact-based decisions. For example, someone would need to tell them, number one, you could tax pension contributions, but then you can't tax it when it's vested or on withdrawal. Or you could tax the money on investment, but you can't tax it on contribution, and you can't tax it on withdrawal. You can only tax it once, you son of a bitches. Now, I also must point out that a pension is earned over a long period, but they claim that taxes are lost in years that are not related to the contribution. I said, am I missing something? Because they're claiming that, say, in 2017, that they lost X number of $1 billion in taxes in that year. Well, the contribution is not related to the taxes that they say the year that you receive it. Because the contribution is different from when you get the money in a pension. It's just common sense. You might never get it. You could die before you ever get your pension. Now, another criticism, I did a calculation on my taxes for the count of the pension plan disability if I had paid taxes on the contribution instead of when I withdrew it. And I wouldn't have had to pay as much taxes as I did if they had taxed me when I got the money instead of when I drew the pension out. Now, is it a one-off scenario that only in my case, in those specific circumstances? I don't know. But their spiel is that when you're going to take money out in the pension, they say, oh, you're going to be in a lower tax bracket when you retire, so you won't get dinged as much in taxes. That's what they usually tell you. Well, then if that's the case, how come I ended up paying them more taxes with the withdrawal method versus if they had taxed it, well, when I got the contribution, when I made the contribution? Like, I think you should be allowed to do the better of the, whichever one's easier. Anyway, I said, see the answer from 1961, they say they will change the tax on pensions so that they will not be taxed while invested, and they will only be taxed when actually received. Now, do I have that here? I'm not sure, to be honest. Looks like this one's about count of the pension plan, so I'll skip that picture. Here it is here, I think. This was a Mr. Donald Methuen Fleming, the Minister of Finance and Receiver General, and he was a progressive conservative. On the 9th of May, 1960, his words were taken down and recorded in the Hansard, and I can search them and find them. Okay, so he's talking about the way they're going to change the system for pensions, and he says, under the deferred plans, the employer also makes an allocation of profits to his employee, but instead of paying it to the employees in cash, the amount is turned over to a trustee to be held in for each employee until he retires. These funds are held by the trustee and are then invested with a view to earning income. Accordingly, each year the trustee for the plan makes an allocation in favor of the employee who is a member of the plan. These allocations are made up of the employee's share of the contributions on account of the profits made. Sounds complicated. So then they said, of course, the proceeds from the plan are not taxed when actually received if they had been taxed each year as they were allocated. Now, you see, that proves my point, okay? So he admits that, you don't have to pay taxes twice. So the proposed legislation will provide for tax deferment for the plans that elect to come under these new provisions. Right? This means that the amounts allocated by the trustee shall not be included in the income of the employee until those amounts are actually received. Again, just like the 1972 Supreme Court of Canada case on money having to be actually received before you can be taxed on it. See, I'm not making this shit up. So anyway, that's the issue there that I was going to talk about. The fact that, registered pension plans, these tax expenditures that Finance Canada, these reports seems awfully suspicious. But if they decide to do it, well, they better do it right. The tax expenditure, as a reminder, isn't the amount of money that's spent that they collected in tax. It's the amount of money that the government could have collected in taxes if they so chose. Now, one of the things that I disagree with, again, from my earlier observation of this shit, is they say that there's so many $100 million because we don't tax workers' compensation. Well, hang the fuck on, Jack. There was a thing called the Great Compromise, in which the right to sue in tort law was exchanged for the right to comprehensive and administrative compensation. So basically the person, the worker, gave up something of value to get something of value if they became injured. So when the government puts out in these reports that they could tax, but they haven't because of the goodness of their heart, they could tax workers' compensation, they're full of shit, okay? Because how would you value the profit? Because Canada only taxes profit. So if you're going to tax workers' compensation or the Pension Act pension or the income replacement benefit or anything else, you have to be able to figure out how much profit there was before it can be taxed. If you're a business, you got revenue, you got expenses, and the difference between the two, if it's a positive, is profit. If you're an employee and you have an employer, you have an employment contract, you don't have any expenses to go to work. So all of the pay that's coming to you from your employer is income. And Canada has an income tax system, so you got to pay income tax on it. People looked at me like I had a Canada Revenue Agency appeals officer tell me I was a tax protester, which I got very mad with her. I said, you know, I worked for Canada Revenue Agency for 16 years, collecting taxes. I served in the military and I was willing to die for my country. If you think I'd lie to save a few fucking dollars on my taxes when I was willing to die for my country, you can go fuck yourself. And I hung up on her. Because I really believe that. They are so stupid to think, just because I want things to be done right, be done by the book. Okay, if you get long-term disability insurance, is that income? No, it's insurance. There's a difference between insurance, and insurance is designed to replace what you lost. Income is designed to add to what you have already. That's the difference between insurance and income. Now, they would have us believe that insurance, long-term disability insurance, is income because they put it into the Income Tax Act. Now, they put it into the fringe benefits part of the Income Tax Act, and they deemed it to be part of employment income. Now, without that deeming, which is a legal device that the government uses to make something absolutely certain, it wouldn't be certain because it's not true, you see? So, you know, they're trying to claim that insurance is income when the question came up in a 1994 Supreme Court of Canada case called Cunningham versus Wheeler, and they were seeking to deduct the long-term disability from the damages in a lawsuit. So they had to decide what's the money that was received in a long-term disability insurance policy. Was that insurance or income? Now, I gotta say, I'm not very pleased with how stupid the courts are if you have to ask, is insurance insurance? You know, I mean, look in the mirror, stupid, you stupid bastard. You're asking a dumb question. Clearly, insurance is not income, and that's what the Supreme Court of Canada ruled. Now, CRA, the government writes the law, but CRA administers it. Finance Canada advises the government on it, which is why they put out those tax expenditure reports. You want to tax income? Go ahead. But don't try to tax things that are not income and simply call them income because you want to tax them. Isn't that a reasonable position? So I'm not a tax protester. What I'm protesting is the government acting unlawfully. Now, excuse me. Let me go up to another post I made. Okay, here's another thing that's been bugging me, and I've done a lot of research in the past. Every now and then a thought strikes me, and then I does a search of my group, which is why I created Observation Post. It's a searchable database. So I was curious about the everyone does it defense. Okay? Now, a little bit of context. The reason I was looking that up is I've been addicted to the train wreck that is the Trump legal problems. And recently he lost like a $500 million civil fraud judgment in the state of New York. So I happened to see a story on CNN, and they interviewed Kevin O'Leary, a Canadian businessman who's supposed to be a pretty good businessman. And he was getting on with such bullshit. Everybody does it. You're going to have all the businesses move out of New York because they're going to wonder if they're next. Well, listen here, you stupid fucker. If you're operating a crooked business, maybe you should worry. But if you have been doing it by the book, you have auditors, and you make sure that everything is on the up and up, you don't have anything to worry about. And that's why you had to protect the integrity of the financial system by having people like Trump get charged if they cook the books. Because if you allow everybody to cook the books, then nobody will trust the system. See? So that reminded me of, this was an argument that the Service Income Support Insurance Plan Policy 901-102, that's what they used when they were trying to get away with it under the Pension Act pension that Dennis Mnuchin's class action fixed. I didn't put the date of when this is from, but I think it's 2003 or 2008, something like that. CISIP President Andre Bouchard. Now, he got fired in October 2012 after Dennis won his case in May of 2012. Applying reductions to long-term disability benefits is a common and accepted insurance industry practice. So basically, that's the same thing that Dennis O'Leary said about, Kevin O'Leary said about the Trump bullshit about businesses. All the businesses do that. Now, as a refresher, here's what I understand what Trump did. When it was time to get a loan from the bank, they inflated the value of their properties so that the banks would give them a preferred rate because, they had so much money as a collateral. But if they were going to pay taxes, they would deflate the value of their properties so that the state wouldn't get as much taxes. So they're screwing people on both ends. The people of New York didn't get as much taxes from the Trump Corporation as they should have. And the banks could have made more money if they had lent him money based on the fact that the properties weren't worth as much as he said. He probably would have had to pay a higher interest rate because he wasn't as rich as they thought. So if you screw over the financial system, that probably affects the prices everybody pays. So to say that this was a victimless crime, which is what a lot of people are saying, is fucking horseshit. Because New York is the center of the financial center, the capital of the world. And you can't have people not trusting the financial capital. So you have to make sure you have robust protections around it. Now, I hope they seizes and sells his buildings because he would hate it. But I don't know what the timetable is after the judgment against him. He asked for a month's delay today or yesterday, and they flat out denied him. Because really, the judgment's already made. So really, the Attorney General of New York only has to go get a court order and then go and take the property and sell it. Trump wouldn't like it, but too fucking bad about you. You shouldn't have, if you don't want to do the time, don't do the crime. Now, but he said all the public service disability insurance plans have reductions. That don't prove anything. That just proves that everybody likes to save money. The RCMP long-term disability also reduces for the monthly Pension Act benefits. The RCMP plan is a mirror copy of the Service Income Support Insurance Plan. The insurer, no, they're not the insurer, they're the administrator, submitted in 2007 that the cost to implement the Ombudsman's recommendation was at between $270.8 million and $295.8 million. This amount was validated by an actuary of the Office of Superintendent of Financial Institutions Canada. Well, it was higher than that, buddy. Of that amount, between $270 million and $295 million is the cost of retroactive payments for an estimated 4,286 eligible claimants, plus the cost of additional reserves to accommodate the increase in future payments to the clients. The balance, $0.8 million, is for administration. And let me explain a little bit about the way insurance works here. You pay the premium, it goes into a pool. The pool is called actuarial reserves, and claims are paid out of the pool, and healthy people paying into the pool subsidize the people who are unlucky and become disabled. Now, if you claw back something, you have less money coming out of the pool, which means that the people who put the money into the pool, which is usually the government, because the premiums for the service income support insurance plan are paid on paper, or 85% by the government and 15% by the Canadian Forces member. So you could say that the soldier saves money, that healthy soldier saves money, but they save $1, the government saves $6, because they pay into the pool 6 times as much. So it's clearly slanted towards the employer, clawbacks are. Now, they also said that there was about 4,286 eligible claimants, but it was up to 10,000 by the time the case was over. Thing is many of those people should have got the money, but they didn't, and that meant that they had suffered financial damages. I got a problem when the government screws over people who were injured in the Service to Canada, because you had to be hurt in the Service to Canada in order to get a Pension Act pension. So that meant that the people that the Service Income Support Insurance Plan, that is the Department of National Defense Long-Term Disability Insurance, they could have been sent to war by the Chief of Defense Staff, became injured in war by enemy action, and then got their long-term disability, got the Pension Act pension, and then the government who sent them to war would save money because they have a Pension Act pension awarded to them. Now, I call these sort of things a fatal conflict of interest. If it's Manulife doing it, there's no conflict of interest because they're independent. But when the government hires somebody to make it look like it's Manulife, when it's not really Manulife, then you have a mess. Okay? Who do you sue? Obviously, Dennis Manouche and his firm knew they had to sue Canada. Obviously, they didn't sue Manulife because they knew they couldn't, because they had no part to play. Now, on that point, editorial comment, expert opinion, even though I'm not a lawyer, it is my understanding when you have an agent-principal relationship, like the government is the principal, hired Manulife, they're the agent. The agent can be sued for their own mistakes. Not sure exactly how that could work, but they shouldn't be just let off scot-free like they did in this case. In fact, just crossed my mind as I'm talking. Perhaps after the government was finished with the lawsuit for Dennis Manouche, they should have turned around and sued Manulife for giving them bad advice, administering the plan improperly, and the taxpayer might have recouped the money from the private long-term disability insurance company. Maybe. Ain't gonna happen though, they're all in bed together. Now, gonna get up to the thing that I was gonna talk about, the other thing I was gonna talk about. Okay, last point, last thing I'm gonna talk about. And again, to make it a bit easier, I'll just read off my post. So, Hansard record of parliamentary debate with respect to the Canada pension plan changes. I footnoted a few points, and in the second picture I put boxes around the relevant quotes I want people to notice. Number 1, Canada pension plan retirement provides retirement income. But note that they do not lump that with Canada Pension Plan Disability, as it has its own point. So the government, the person who was making this comment, for some reason they didn't call Canada Pension Plan Disability income, like they called the Canada Pension Plan Retirement Pension income. Number 2, Canada Pension Plan Disability is insurance, essentially. The government at the time did not claim that this provides income like it did with the Canada Pension Plan Disability, a significant distinction in my expert opinion. But I think people these days regard any receipt of money to be income when it all depends on why you got the money and is it an increase in your wealth. You get money and somebody owed you money and it just pays you back. You didn't make any money. You didn't make any income. You were paid for something someone owed you. Now, if you think about the income replacement benefit and anything paid under the new Veterans Charter, the Veterans Wellbeing Act they call it these days, none of it is income. You don't go out and serve to get the money. You get the money because you get injured in service. A debt is being repaid. You can't tax that legitimately. Number 3, income protection is stated to be a policy goal of the Old Age Security and Canada Pension Plan. A case could be made for that. Canada has a retirement policy where the Old Age Security plus Canada Pension Plan plus savings and pensions form what you need to sustain yourself in retirement after active work. Pensions are formed, perhaps I'm too sensitive as I kind of see this as semantics around social insurance, aka welfare. Pensions are formed by savings during active work, but not old age security, as this is a government pension that was once funded by sales tax. According to sources I've read, the government would have us believe that old age security pension is freely given, but even if sales tax didn't pay it, then the use of income taxes pays for your right to get it. Right? You pay taxes your whole life. You get old age security. You paid for it in the past. And you even got to pay taxes on the old age security, even though it's a piddly amount. Number 4, 7 out of 10 provinces with 67% of the population is required to make major changes to the Canada Pension Plan Act. Was this a source where I got that information? Not sure. Don't know. Maybe. But as they note that they required a province to consent. Number 1, did the province consent to giving Canada Pension Plan Disability retroactive to administrators? It could have been because the provinces have a fatal conflict of interest just as the federal government does. The government long-term disability plans are administrative services only, and administrators run them for the employer. Number 2, why use administrator instead of insurer or underwriter? Seems to me that the wording of the law change was meant to assist insurance companies instead of the underwriters of the policy. Now here's what I'm talking about. Canada Pension Plan Act Section 65.3, that's what I'm talking about. They changed that. It wasn't present in the Act until 1991, and the Hansard I'm talking about. So from 1966 to 1991, there was no provision there to allow the money to be sent directly to an administrator of an income support program. None. 0 legal jurisdiction, legal authority. None. 0. But the government allowed itself to be convinced and to put into the law a law that would allow a retroactive payment, a one-time only payment, to be made directly to the administrator. Not the underwriter, the fucking administrator. Now, I said the green box is the flat rate changes to the Canada Pension Plan meant to fix the problem when the Quebec Pension Plan Disability had a much higher flat rate. Michael Prince stated this increase caused hardship for the Canada Pension Plan Disability beneficiaries. See the picture I said. Now, when the person was talking about this back in 18th November 1991, her name was Barbara Jane Bobby Sparrow. She was the parliamentary secretary to the Minister of National Health and Welfare, progressive conservative. They said that there was a problem with people who were disabled. Talk about spin, right? people who were disabled couldn't get their money because insurance companies didn't pay them because they were holding it back until they wanted to see if they were going to count the pension on disability. So they were going to allow the companies to get the money directly from the government, and that way the people wouldn't be put out because they will get the money from their insurance plan. When the fucking government should have said, listen, it's against the common law for us to give the money of a pension to anybody but the contributor, so you go fuck yourself, okay? You can't have this person's money legally, but they were convinced to change the law, which the government, as a fiduciary, you breached your fucking fiduciary duty. You are not allowed to do something that's against the benefit of the interest of your contributor. They were either sold down the river or they wanted to be convinced. So that was one thing, and let me go to the next picture, the one I'm talking about. So, okay, here's what she said exactly. The proposed legislation will allow the reimbursement of Canada Pension Plan disability benefits to the administrator of a disability income plan under approved conditions at the beneficiary's consent. So consent is a very important point. So if you don't consent, they can't fucking have it. Currently, some long-term disability insurance plans withhold a portion of the disability benefit from clients while they wait for CPP determination to be made. Notice the word of some. When you're talking about a quantity, when you use some, it's more than zero but less than half. If it was most, you can infer that it's more than 51% but not 100%. So these yahoos changed the law according to them, put it on paper, that some insurance companies don't pay all of the money to the disabled person. So we're going to let everybody get fucked over by having the money get sent directly to the administrator in spite of the common law. The proposed change would allow disability benefit applicants to avoid this problem. What problem? And ensure that the large majority of disability plans will be willing to guarantee payments for the full amount of the disability entitlement between the onset of private benefit and the award of CPP disability benefit. Now, I've been talking about this topic many fucking years. Many insurance plans, perhaps most insurance plans, operate with a hybrid rule, which says that for the first 2 years you have to be unable to do your own job. After 2 years, very few people get it, 16% according to my statistics. You get it till age 65. Now, in military terms, that's 3A and 3B definition of disability under the Queen's Regulation Order 15.0 Now, a 3A definition is the same as Canada Pension Plan. You can't do any job. But the 3B one is you can't do your own trade, the same thing as Canadian Forces Superannuation Act pension users. So linking that to the Canada Pension Plan and the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act pensions, I'm off topic a bit, but bridging, on paper, the two pensions are entirely different. The Canada Pension Plan Disability is a 3A only pension. The Canadian Forces Superannuation Act pension is a 3A and a 3B pension. CISIP is a 3A and a 3B type long-term disability insurance. So they're not the same. They're nowhere close to being the same. So I got these problems when they want to be convinced. The government wants to allow these insurance companies to fuck us over. Now, mention two more things. My throat's getting a bit sore. Still not over that infection. Okay. The government, she said, has introduced a number of initiatives which has strengthened the income situation of Canadian families who are most in need. Now, when I say that, that makes me cringe. In need means welfare. Go fuck yourself. Changes to the Canada Pension Plan in 1987 included a substantial increase in the disability benefits. The increase in the flat rate component of the payment is of greater benefit to lower income families. No, it's not, you prick. Because they get it clawed back by the insurance that you were talking about you were going to get them to take back. So you got to wonder, is anybody home? You'd almost like knock on her head and say, anybody home? You just increased the amount a lot, triple. But the first part, you were talking about allowing them to take the money back. So they were letting give with one hand and take with the other. It's that stupid infection. Now, the thing is, okay, last point I was going to talk about. One of the ways that I think I could drive home the problem here is to engage the Finance Canada people and to ask them how much taxes, how much do clawbacks harm the tax system? Now, I've talked about this before, but let me recap. Let's say my Canada pension plan. It's about $10,000, well, $12,000 a month. Now, $12,000 would be paid more on my Sun Life because I would have had more on the Sun Life because they clawed it back, so I'd have to pay tax on it. My SISP also took it into account. So on paper, well, I would have had it if they weren't clawing it back. I would have had more money on my SISP. Now, my bridging and my public service pension, if they weren't clawing it back, I would have more of a public service pension. And then my reserve force pension plan will be higher because if they weren't clawing back the Canada Pension Plan, I'd have a higher pension. So that would result in more taxes for the government because I would have more income. Now, the problem is that they don't seem to understand, and there are many more employers out there than there are, like government. There's about 4 private employers to every government employees. So, assuming that they have the same rate of disablement that the government has, that means there's a bigger base available, and the employers are the ones who save with clawbacks, not the alleged insurer. So, essentially, the government could probably get more taxes if there were no clawbacks than it would have in higher long-term disability payments. Well, it's not actually the higher long-term disability. The payments would be an increase in their pensions, Canadian Forces pension, and that would have to go up. And the long-term disability would have to go up because they wouldn't be able to claw back something else. So right now they have all of this, like Canadian Forces pension saves because of the Canada Pension Plan, SISP saves because of the Canada Pension Plan, and then Veterans Affairs Canada saves because of the Canada Pension Plan. That's why I call it triple dip clawback, okay? So if you're unlucky enough to get the Canada Pension Plan, disability, and you're getting an injury and service payment from Veterans Affairs, and you're getting the SISP payment, and you're getting the Canadian Forces pension, you could be harmed 3 fucking times, okay? Now, I don't understand how they're getting away with this, because I've been telling them about it since 2018. When this idea popped up, it all happened because of leading seaman or master seaman Sean Curry, retired. I was trying to help him with taxes. He brought over some earnings loss benefit statements, accounting stuff. I didn't ask to look at it, but it was there, so I looked at it and I said, hey, Sean, look at what they're doing here. They're taking your Canada Pension Plan and your Canadian Forces Superannuation Act pension into account at both Veterans Affairs and the Department of National Defence. If you take it into account at one of them, you can't take it into account at the other one. That's double dipping. Now, when I heard a member of Parliament, we both live in the same member of Parliament, Seamus O'Regan, and he happened to be the Minister of Veterans Affairs at that time. So we spoke to his staff about this, and we figured it would get fixed in 6 or 8 months. government don't move fast, but it's so clearly inequitable, unjust, unfair, you both can't take it into account. It's that simple. But they have continued to do that for another 6 fucking years. I'm hoping that they end up in jail out of this. Some of these fuckers end up in jail because they have knowingly hurt people who have been injured in Canada's military service. This is nuts. No sane person should do this. On that note, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week, hopefully.